I should have known something was wrong when the wedding coordinator looked past me the moment I arrived. Her smile froze halfway, the way people smile when they don't know where to seat someone who doesn't quite fit. She held her clipboard like a shield and said, "You must be Brandon's mother. The seating list is complicated today." Complicated. That word always means you're not going to like this. The ceremony was held at a sprawling estate on the edge of Denver. Stone fountains, manicured hedges, everything polished to a shine that smelled faintly of money and roses. I walked up the gravel path, heels crunching, clutching my small purse like a life raft. I'd chosen a simple navy dress, pearls, and the soft gray shawl my late husband gave me for our 30th anniversary. I thought it said respectable. Maybe it said outdated. Inside, laughter floated through the air, crystal glasses clinking, soft music, the hum of expensive perfume. I saw Vivian's family first. Her mother, elegant and sleek in silver satin, was surrounded by women with perfect hair and practiced laughter. When her eyes landed on me, she tilted her head slightly, the kind of glance that measured and dismissed in one smooth motion. "Eleanor, right?" she said. "Brandon mentioned you might come." Might, as if I were an afterthought. "Yes," I said softly. "I wouldn't miss it." She smiled thinly. "Of course." Then she turned back to her friends, already halfway done with me. I looked for Brandon, scanning the crowd for his familiar shape. My boy, well, not a boy anymore, 35, a marketing executive now, confident and distant. He used to sit at our kitchen table as a teenager, drawing comic strips and telling me he'd never forget where he came from. But that was before promotions, before Vivian, before their new world with its new rules. When he finally appeared, standing near the aisle in his tailored suit, I lifted my hand to wave. His eyes caught mine for a fraction of a second, then slid away as if I were a stranger who'd waved by mistake. That moment, that glance, hit harder than any word could. A young woman with a headset approached me. "Mrs. Patterson?" "Yes?" She checked her clipboard. "You're seated in row J, that's, toward the back, right behind the photographer's section." "The back?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm the groom's mother." Her smile flickered. "Yes, ma'am, but the front rows are reserved for immediate family and VIP guests." "I'm so sorry." Immediate family. I wanted to laugh. I followed her through the rows, past faces I didn't know, Vivian's co-workers, golf buddies, and old college friends. Every step felt like being erased in slow motion. The further back I went, the smaller my place in Brandon's life became. When I reached row J, I saw a metal folding chair tucked behind a column of flower arrangements. I sat down, carefully, the petals brushing my shoulder like an afterthought. The photographers were adjusting their lights nearby, their chatter overlapping the string quartet. From here, the bride and groom looked like figures in a magazine, beautiful, distant, untouchable. The ceremony began. Everyone rose as Vivian appeared, radiant in lace and diamonds. Brandon's face glowed with admiration. I wanted to be happy for him. I really did, but all I could feel was this quiet ache spreading in my chest, the kind that hums instead of shouts. As the vows began, I caught fragments of whispers behind me. "Who's the lady in the back?" "I think she's with catering." "No, I heard she's his mother." "Really? Why would she sit there?" Their words felt like gentle knives, polite, curious, but cutting just the same. I folded my hands in my lap, nails pressing into my palms until I felt the sting. I told myself not to cry, not here, not now. When the officiant said, "Does anyone object?" A nervous laugh rippled through the guests. I almost wanted to raise my hand, not because I objected to the marriage, but because I objected to being invisible. Vivian's mother dabbed her eyes in the front row, glancing back once, just long enough to confirm that I was still where they'd placed me, out of sight, out of mind. When the couple kissed, everyone cheered. I clapped too, softly like a ghost clapping for the living. After the ceremony, people stood and drifted toward the reception hall, clusters of laughter and champagne. I stayed seated for a while, pretending to check my phone so I wouldn't have to meet anyone's eyes. The photographers packed up their gear, chatting about lighting and angles, stepping around me like I was part of the decor. I remembered when Brandon was 10 and refused to sing in the school concert because he didn't want me sitting alone in the audience. "You'll be up there with me," he'd said, and I had. We sang off-key, side by side. That memory stung now, bright and cruel. When I finally stood, my knees stiff from sitting too long, the wind picked up across the courtyard, rustling the ribbons and petals. I caught sight of Brandon and Vivian posing for photos by the fountain. Their photographer adjusted the angle, telling them to hold hands, look happy. Brandon's gaze brushed past me again, quick, guilty. He smiled for the camera right after. That smile, perfect, practiced. I wanted to leave. I wanted to vanish before anyone noticed how much I didn't belong. But something, maybe pride, maybe stubbornness, kept me rooted there. I'd taught hundreds of students over 30 years, faced down angry parents, tight budgets, and sleepless nights. I could face this too. Still, as the laughter drifted across the courtyard, I felt like a misplaced page in someone else's story, something that didn't quite fit but hadn't yet been thrown away. I walked slowly toward the reception tent, my heels sinking slightly into the grass. The sun had started to dip behind the mountains, painting the sky gold and lilac. The view was breathtaking, and for a moment, I wished someone beside me could see it too. Someone who'd remember the way light softens everything it touches. At the entrance, a waiter stopped me. "Excuse me, ma'am, are you with the Blackwood party or the Patterson side?" "The Patterson side," I said. He hesitated, glancing at his list. There might have been a seating adjustment. Let me check." Of course there was. While he scanned the paper, I stood there, feeling the eyes of guests brush past me like cold wind. I realized then that humiliation doesn't always come from cruelty. Sometimes it comes from indifference, from the way people look through you as if you've already faded from the frame. Finally, he said, "You can take any open seat near the back wall, ma'am." Any open seat. I nodded, thanked him, and walked in. My hands trembled slightly, so I clasped them together. The air smelled of champagne and lilacs. Soft music played. Laughter rose again. Somewhere between the flowers and the noise, I promised myself something quietly. This won't be the story they remember. And just as that thought settled, a voice beside me said, calm, deep, familiar, "Act like you're with me." I turned, startled, and met the steady eyes of a stranger who somehow felt like a memory. I didn't recognize him at first. He slid quietly into the empty seat beside me, calm and confident, as if he'd been meant to be there all along. The chaos of the reception buzzed around us. Music, laughter, clinking glasses. But when he spoke, everything seemed to pause. "Act like you're with me," he said softly. At first, I thought I'd misheard him. His voice was low, steady, with the kind of authority that makes you listen before you decide to question it. I turned toward him, startled, and saw a man in a tailored gray suit, silver hair perfectly combed, eyes warm but unreadable. He didn't look like a stranger. He looked like someone who belonged everywhere he went. I didn't know what made me obey, but I did. I straightened, smiled faintly, and nodded. And just like that, the air around me shifted. People began to notice. Heads turned. The same guests who had ignored me earlier now stared with new curiosity. The whispers started again, but this time they sounded different. Curious, cautious, even a little respectful. Vivian's mother, who had spent most of the day pretending I didn't exist, froze mid-sentence when she saw us together. Her polite smile faltered, replaced by something closer to confusion. The stranger leaned slightly toward me, his arm resting on the back of my chair, as if we'd known each other for years. "You looked like you could use a friend," he said under his breath. I managed a small laugh, though it came out shaky. "That obvious?" He smiled, eyes crinkling at the corners. "Only to someone who's felt the same way before." It was such a simple thing to say, but it cut through the fog that had settled over me all day. For hours I'd felt invisible, like a guest at my own child's life. But with this man beside me, I felt seen again. The kind of seen that warms you from the inside, that reminds you you're still someone. Across the room, Brandon noticed, he was talking with Vivian's friends, his tie loosened, his smile wide. But when his eyes met mine, he hesitated. His gaze darted to the man sitting beside me, then back to me. For the first time that day, he looked uncertain. I didn't look away. Vivian joined him, her expression tight. She whispered something, glancing in our direction. He shook his head, pretending to brush it off, but I saw it. The quick clench of his jaw, the faint flush in his cheeks. Resentment rose in me, steady and sharp, not because I wanted to embarrass them, but because they had already embarrassed me. They had chosen to hide me like a stain, to tuck me in the back row while pretending I should be grateful to be included at all. And now, just because someone treated me like I mattered, they were uncomfortable. The stranger, Theo, I would later learn, reached for a glass of water and handed it to me. "You're shaking," he said quietly. "I'm fine," I whispered, though I wasn't. My chest ached with a mix of shame and defiance. He studied me for a moment, then smiled again, gentle, patient, as if he understood more than I said. "Then let's make them believe that," he murmured. We sat together for the rest of the reception, talking softly about nothing in particular. He asked about the food, the flowers, the music. Every question was ordinary, but his tone made it feel like conversation, not small talk. It grounded me. For the first time that day, I didn't feel like a forgotten guest. The photographer circled the room, snapping pictures of the newlyweds and their guests. When he reached our table, Vivian's mother whispered something to him, her eyes flicking toward us. He hesitated, unsure, then lifted the camera anyway. Theo smiled easily, turning slightly toward me. "Smile," he said quietly, and I did. The flash went off. I don't know why that single moment felt so powerful. Maybe because it was proof that I existed in this story after all. Proof that no one, not even my own son, could erase me completely. As the night went on, I caught more glances from people who had ignored me earlier. Some smiled politely, others looked away, uncomfortable. Vivian's mother whispered again to her circle of friends. I could almost hear their questions. Who is he? Where did she find him? Why is he with her? And for once, I didn't care. I sat straighter, my shoulders back, my chin lifted. Every bit of warmth in Theo's quiet confidence seemed to reflect onto me. It wasn't about pretending anymore. It was about remembering who I had been before life and loss had made me small. When the music changed to a slow song, Theo stood and extended his hand. "May I?" he asked. I looked around. Brandon's face was unreadable, frozen in the polite smile people wear when they're caught between anger and confusion. Vivian's eyes darted away. "Yes," I said. He led me to the dance floor, and though we didn't move much, just a slow, gentle sway, it was enough. People watched, but I didn't feel exposed. I felt steady, seen, alive. When the song ended, he guided me back to my seat, his hand lingering lightly at my elbow. "You did beautifully," he said with a grin. I smiled, my voice barely a whisper. "You have no idea how much I needed that." He looked at me for a long moment, and something in his expression softened. "Maybe I do," he said. And before I could ask what he meant, the MC called for the couple to cut the cake. The crowd shifted toward the front. Theo's hand brushed mine once, lightly, as if in reassurance. I didn't know yet who he was or why he had chosen to sit beside me. All I knew was that for the first time in years, I felt like more than someone's forgotten mother. And I wasn't about to let that feeling go. The ceremony had ended hours ago, but I still felt like I was standing in that back row, half hidden, half forgotten. The reception was winding down, and guests were beginning to drift toward the terrace, their laughter floating like music I wasn't invited to dance to. Theo and I walked slowly through the grand hallway, side by side, the noise behind us fading into something distant and unimportant. The lights were softer here, the air cooler, scented faintly with pine from the gardens outside. For the first time all day, I could breathe. Theo led me toward the hotel terrace, where the view opened wide to the Colorado mountains. The sun had already dipped behind the peaks, leaving a faint orange glow along the horizon. I leaned against the railing, hands resting on the cold iron, and let the air fill my lungs. He stood beside me, quiet, his presence steady. "You handled yourself with grace in there," he said. "I tried," I answered, though the words felt small. "You did more than try. You reminded them who you are." I wanted to believe that, but years of silence and compromise had made doubt a habit. I looked down at my hands. "You don't know who I am," I said softly. He smiled just barely. "Don't I?" There was something about the way he said it, calm, certain, that made me turn to him. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, I felt like time folded in on itself. That color, that look, it pulled at something deep inside me, something I hadn't touched in half a century. He took a small step closer. "Eleanor," he said, and my name sounded like a memory. "You really don't recognize me, do you?" My breath caught. "Should I?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver lighter. It was worn, the initials engraved on the side faded but still visible. TB. My heart stopped. I hadn't seen that lighter since I was 18. The world tilted slightly and I gripped the railing. "Theo Blackwood," I whispered. He nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. "You remember." I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. Theo, the boy I'd loved all those summers ago, the boy who used to meet me by the river, whose letters had stopped arriving without explanation, the boy my mother had called unsuitable because his family had too much money, too much power, and not enough humility. "I thought you forgot me," I said quietly. "I thought you just stopped writing." "I wrote, Eleanor," he said, his voice heavy. "Every week for years. I thought you didn't want me." My chest tightened. I could almost see my mother's handwriting, her perfect script on every envelope she handled. I remembered her insisting on checking the mail, saying, "You're too young for distractions, Ellie." My throat burned. "She never gave me your letters," I said. "She must have destroyed them." He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. "I figured something like that. I came back once, years later, but your house was empty. They said you'd gone away to college. I thought you'd moved on." Tears blurred my vision. "All this time? I thought you forgot." I told myself I must not have meant much. He reached out and took my hand, his grip warm and firm. "You meant everything." It hit me then. How different my life might have been. How one person's control, one lie could reroute decades. The quiet resentment I'd carried for my mother, for all her manipulation and pride, flared into something sharper. She'd stolen letters, yes, but she'd also stolen time, years I could never reclaim. "I could have yelled," I said softly, "but I chose silence. For her, for my son, for everyone who told me to stay quiet and be grateful." Theo studied me for a long moment. "And where did that silence get you?" I didn't answer. The truth was written all over me. Seated in the back row of my own son's wedding, dismissed, pitied, forgotten. My silence had become my prison. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The wind moved through the pines, and the sound reminded me of long drives with my husband, of evenings filled with grading papers and quiet dinners for one. I had learned to live without being seen. Finally, I said, You shouldn't have come today." "Maybe not," he replied gently, "but I'm glad I did." His voice had softened, but his eyes still held that quiet strength I remembered. He hadn't come to rescue me. He'd come to remind me that I didn't need rescuing. Behind us, laughter drifted out from the ballroom. I turned and saw Brandon standing near the doors, watching us. Vivian was beside him, her arm looped through his, her expression tight and unreadable. He looked like a man caught between two lives, the one he'd built and the one that had built him. He approached slowly, his steps hesitant. "Mom," he said, voice low, "you've been out here a while. Everything okay?" I met his eyes. "Better than okay." He glanced at Theo, uneasy. "I didn't realize you knew anyone here." "I didn't," I said, "until today." Vivian joined him, forcing a polite smile. "We were just wondering if you'd like to take a family picture before the photographer leaves." I almost laughed at the irony. Hours ago, they'd hidden me in the shadows. Now, because of Theo's presence, because people had started whispering about the elegant man beside me, they wanted me in the frame, not for love, for appearances. I could have said yes. I could have let them pretend nothing had happened, but I didn't. "Thank you," I said, steady and calm, "but I think I'll pass. I have everything I need right here." Vivian blinked, taken aback. Brandon's face fell, confusion turning to embarrassment. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For once, he had no script to follow. They walked away after a moment, the silence between us sharper than any argument. Theo looked at me with quiet pride. That was brave. "It shouldn't have to be," I said. "But I suppose it is." He smiled gently. "Then let this be your start." We stood there as the first stars began to appear, the last of the music fading behind us. I felt lighter, though not in the easy, happy way I'd imagined happiness might feel. This was something quieter, like standing up straight after years of bowing. When the wind brushed against my face, I realized that the resentment I'd carried for so long was still there, but it wasn't in control anymore. It was part of the story, not the ending. Theo's hand found mine again. "You were always stronger than they saw," he said. And for the first time in years, I believed it. When the guests began leaving for the night, the music had softened into something slow and forgettable. The laughter that once filled the air was thinning, replaced by the rustle of dresses and the faint scrape of chairs being folded away. I sat with Theo on a bench near the garden lights, just far enough from the reception tent that I could hear my own thoughts. The air was cool, and the mountain breeze carried the scent of lilac and champagne. It should have been peaceful, but my mind was a storm. Brandon hadn't spoken to me again since that brief moment on the terrace. I caught glimpses of him inside, his expression tight and distracted, as he thanked guests and posed for photos. Vivian hovered beside him, like a queen in her own kingdom, her smile flawless, her voice sharp enough to slice through conversation. Every time I looked at her, I felt a quiet sting, not because she was beautiful or confident, but because she had taken my son so completely that he no longer recognized what he'd lost. Theo noticed the way I stared toward the tent. "You don't owe them anything tonight," he said. I sighed. "He's my son." "He's also an adult who made choices," Theo replied. "So have you." His calm tone steadied me, but my resentment still burned under the surface. I thought about all the years I had spent being careful not to offend, not to burden, not to expect too much. I had accepted being the helper, the listener, the quiet one in the corner. I had made myself small so others could feel large. And for what? So I could be seated behind the photographers at my own son's wedding? I folded my hands in my lap and looked at the glow from the reception hall. "When Brandon was little, he used to grab my hand when he was scared," I said. "He'd hold on so tightly his fingers would shake. I told him that no matter how old he got, I'd always be there to hold his hand back. I wonder when he stopped believing that." Theo didn't speak right away. He just placed his hand gently over mine, the way he had earlier that afternoon. "He'll remember one day," he said quietly, "but that's not your responsibility anymore." Inside the tent, Vivian's mother laughed, a bright, practiced laugh that made me wince. I watched her glide between tables, her silver gown catching the light. She was the kind of woman who never had to earn her place at the table. People simply made room for her. When her eyes met mine through the open flap of the tent, she offered a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was the same smile she'd given me that morning, the smile that said, "You'll never quite belong here." I looked away. Theo and I sat in silence for a while, the hum of the night settling around us. Finally he said, "You have every right to be angry, you know." I nodded slowly. "I'm not sure anger helps anymore." "Maybe not," he said, "but truth does." That word, truth, hung in the air between us. For so long, I had been afraid of it, afraid of what would happen if I stopped pretending everything was fine. My whole life had been built on keeping peace at the cost of myself. Now I saw how deeply that habit had shaped me. "I think I let them take pieces of me," I said. "One favor, one apology, one silence at a time." Theo's voice softened. "Then it's time you take those pieces back." I wanted to. I truly did. But resentment is heavy, and mine had grown roots. Each memory of neglect, every small dismissal was tangled in those roots. Even now, part of me still wanted Brandon to turn around, to say he was sorry, to invite me forward. That tiny hope felt like weakness, but it was real. When the music faded for the final time, the guests began spilling out of the tent with their goodbyes and leftover slices of cake. I stayed seated, watching as Brandon and Vivian stood near the exit, thanking people as they left. I wondered if he would look for me, if he'd notice I was still there. He didn't. Not until the last car pulled away did he finally step outside. Vivian was beside him, her voice low but sharp. I couldn't hear her words, but I could read her face, tight, annoyed, impatient. Brandon followed her gaze toward me. He hesitated, then offered a brief wave, the kind you give a neighbor from across the street. No words, no approach, just distance. That was when the hurt settled into something deeper than anger. It was the quiet understanding that I could not change what I meant to them. Not tonight, maybe not ever. Theo stood and offered me his arm. "Come on," he said softly. "You've stayed long enough." I looked once more at the glowing tent, the fading music, the silhouettes of people who had made me feel smaller than I'd ever thought possible. Then I rose, taking his arm. "You're right," I said. "It's time." As we walked toward the car, the gravel crunched beneath our feet, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. I had no apologies left to give. The resentment was still there, but it was quieter now, like a wound finally starting to close. Theo opened the car door for me and smiled. "You did well tonight," he said. "I didn't do anything," I replied. "Yes," he said softly, "you finally did." The morning after the wedding, I woke up to sunlight spilling through the curtains of my small apartment. The silence felt heavy but calm, like the world had finally stopped expecting anything from me. My dress from the night before hung neatly over the chair. I ran my fingers over the fabric and smiled faintly. It no longer felt like a reminder of humiliation. It felt like armor that had done its job. I made myself coffee and sat by the window, watching people walk their dogs and start their day. For once, I didn't rush to call or explain myself. I didn't owe anyone an apology for existing. I was still thinking about Theo, how steady his voice had been, how he'd appeared when I needed him most. It still felt unbelievable, like a story I might have read to my students years ago. My phone buzzed on the table. Brandon's name appeared on the screen. For a moment, I hesitated. My hand hovered above the phone, and then I let it ring. He called again, then once more. Finally, a message appeared. "Mom, we need to talk. Vivian's upset. She said you embarrassed her." I read the words twice. embarrassed her. After everything, that was the takeaway. I set the phone down and leaned back, closing my eyes. There was a time when that message would have sent me spiraling, apologizing, defending, explaining. But now, I only felt a quiet sadness. A second message came. Please call me back. People are talking. I smiled a little at that. People are talking, as if that mattered more than kindness. I didn't answer. Later that afternoon, an email arrived. It wasn't from Brandon or Vivian. It was from one of my former students, a woman I hadn't heard from in over 20 years. Mrs. Patterson, she wrote, I saw a photo of you online from the wedding. You looked so confident. I wanted to thank you. You were the first person who ever believed I could be more than what people said I was. I hope life has been kind to you. I stared at the message, my chest tightening with something that wasn't pain this time. It was gratitude. That photo, the one Vivian's mother probably whispered about, had found its way into the world, and somehow it had inspired someone. Maybe I hadn't been erased after all. That evening, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Vivian. The message was short and sharp. You've caused enough tension. Please stay away for a while. Brandon needs space. Resentment rose in me again, slow and familiar. I had spent a lifetime being told to make myself smaller so others could be comfortable. But I was done shrinking. I didn't reply. Instead, I deleted the message, finished my tea, and sat quietly until the anger passed. A few hours later, Brandon sent one last text. Mom, I don't understand why you're doing this. You're breaking the family apart. That one hurt. I placed the phone face down and let myself cry, not out of guilt, but out of exhaustion. I had carried that family on my back for so long, smoothing every rough edge, softening every word that might hurt, and yet I was the one accused of breaking it. When the tears stopped, I stood and looked in the mirror. My eyes were swollen, but there was something new in them. Resolve. I wasn't the same woman who'd walked into that wedding, desperate for a seat at someone else's table. I had built tables of my own before, and I could do it again. The next morning, I drove to a small bookstore downtown. It was quiet, filled with the scent of old paper and cedar. I bought a notebook and a pen and sat in the corner by the window. Page 1. Dear Theo. I didn't know if I'd ever send it, but it felt right to start. I wrote about that night, about how he'd given me back a piece of myself without asking for anything in return. As I wrote, something shifted inside me. The resentment I'd carried for Brandon and Vivian was still there, but it had changed shape. It wasn't fire anymore. It was fuel. It reminded me to keep living, to keep choosing dignity over apology. Outside, the sun was setting over Denver, turning the sky gold. I packed up my things and stepped into the evening light. The city hummed around me, alive, indifferent, full of promise. When I reached home, I made tea and opened my window to let the cool air in. The phone stayed silent. For once, the quiet didn't feel lonely. It felt like peace. I thought of Theo's voice on the terrace. You reminded them who you are. Maybe that was the point all along. As the sky darkened, I whispered into the stillness. I won't be afraid to tell the truth anymore, even if it hurts. Then I smiled, because for the first time in years, I knew exactly who I was, and I wasn't invisible anymore.